talk to you a bit about my experience with Straight Asia. My last video on G Adventures has gotten a lot of great feedback, and so I really wanted to provide a nice comprehensive review for Straight Asia. I did their Mekong Flexi Pass tour, and that means I took it from Bangkok up through Laos and through Cambodia. Just to give the rating off the bat, I would probably give it a 3 out of 5 overall. I want to break this up into a few different things: accommodation, value for the price, activities included, tour guides, and just overall thoughts. The first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about doing this review is the accommodation. That's because it was awful. It was just bad. We stayed in places that didn't have hot water. Some places didn't even have any water. Many places didn't have air conditioning. Many places had cockroaches. There's one place we're pretty sure had bed bugs. There was a lot of just really bad places that had construction near them. And I know a lot of people will probably think, well, it's Southeast Asia, so there's probably a lot of places that are like this. And yes, there are a lot of places that are like this. But because of the way that the passes are structured, you can either have an all-inclusive pass or a less-inclusive pass, and the less-inclusive pass was about half of our group, and that didn't include accommodation or activities. That group was able to, every time we were in a place, book their own accommodation for the same price or cheaper, and have just as good, if not better, quality places that they stayed at. One of the main reasons for that is that they don't group you. So if you're a single, then you have to be in a single room by yourself. Most of the places weren't hostels, they were typically guest houses. There was no dorms, so unlike G Adventures where it was all grouped together, which was also great at getting to know each other, it was separate. So this really drove their costs up, and I'm guessing that's why we stayed in really awful places. It also was very apparent throughout the whole time that they were getting commissions off of certain places that we went to, be it food or activities. Every place that we went to, it was kind of like, well, why did we go there? We would find places on TripAdvisor that were rated better, that were cheaper. So this was just a reoccurring theme. And accommodation is a huge thing for me, and staying in different places. I can rough it pretty well, but I need running water and I need a comfortable bed. There was one place that I was commenting to a girl in our group, and we're pretty sure that our bed was just cardboard, like sheets of cardboard laid on each other. So next I want to talk about the activities that were included. This is one area that I thought they did really, really well in. There were a lot of activities included that if I were to buy it on my own and not get the group rate, or not pay that lump sum up front, I probably wouldn't have done it. One of them was Flight of the Gibbon, where we got to do zip lining, and it was super, super fun. It was a great bonding activity for the group. So overall, I was pretty impressed with the activities. There were a couple of times that it seemed like the activities were really hyped up in the itinerary. One being the turtles. It was something that this turtle lake was supposed to be really cool, and it ended up being, it was mating season, so they were at the bottom of the lake. And in addition, it was really far out of the way. So just overall, it was more hits than misses, and I think it was a really great value for the money. Any time that somebody had to add in an activity, which you could do if you were on the less accommodating pass, it was a lot more than I think if you had bought it through the group at the beginning. Something else with price and value is the hop on, hop off sort of aspect. This is something that they really push, that, you know, if you get to a place and you really like it, you can stay there for longer. This ended up being something that didn't benefit me at all. For starters, I was on a strict time limit, so I didn't have any time to hop off. I had planned for going through the trip throughout. This was also something that wasn't clear at all on their website about how it worked, and I didn't really figure out until I got there. Pretty much everyone else in my group didn't hop off as well. It kind of defeats the purpose of being on a group tour, I think. That idea of having a community that you get to know and getting to know your tour guide and all those sorts of things, that was sort of defeated if you did hop off the tour. You would stay in another place for anywhere from 2 to 5 days until the next tour came through, and then you'd be joining up with another group. We did have a couple of people who were hopped off and they joined up with our group, and it ended up being great, but there was always sort of this divide between like the old group and the new group. This tour is definitely cheaper than a lot of other tours that I looked at, But thinking back to it, I can't think of any tour that had more than about $1,000 difference, which for 5 weeks um, is not that much of a difference. And if I could do it over again, I would 1,000% spend that extra bit to have that great accommodation and be able to have one tour guide throughout. Another thing to note with the price is that pretty much no meals were included. I can't think of really any meals that were included besides the homestays. However, the homestays are something really unique that this company does. I wasn't able to find that in other companies, and one of them was really awesome. The one in Laos that we did was really, really cool, but the one that we did in Cambodia was actually something really totally different. And this is a bit of a tangent story just about the ethics of the company. And this really related to my negative experience overall. So we went to this homestay in Cambodia, and we went to this local village, and one of the things we were told was that we could buy some school supplies to give to the kids. So I thought, great, this is a great way to support the local community. So I bought some pencils and some paper, I think, or notebooks or something. So we get to this school, and as we're walking to the school, these kids start coming up to us, and they're like asking for the stuff that we have, clearly knowing that people have been there before to do this. So first I ask, I'm like, how many times a week does this happen? They say 2 times a week, that the groups will come through and bring all these supplies to the village. So I was going into this thinking that it would be like you get to the school and you hand out 1 pencil per kid, or maybe we just gave it all to the teacher and she would use them in the classroom. No. I will insert footage of how insane this was. Kids were swarming us. We had kids from the one class we were in, and then once school let out for the other classes, they were all in there. We completely disrupted their day at the school. And it was something really, really negative that my whole group thought really fostered this idea of begging for the children, this real greed. There were some children who had like 3 or 4 little gifts from us, and kids that had none, and these other kids were still asking for more. It was a really horrible environment. It really hindered my entire trip and left such a bad taste in my mouth. I mentioned with my G Adventures group, like, it really felt wholesome, and you could really feel the ethics of the company, and this was the complete contrast of, I could feel the ethics that they represented. Our tour guide didn't seem too bothered by it. It was really awful. It's something that I wrote to Stray about. I wrote in my TripAdvisor review because I really want them to recognize what they're supporting. And I, as a conscious traveler, don't want to support an organization that supports this behavior in children. It too is important to note that it wasn't just children being children and wanting things. It was supporting the behavior. It was encouraging them by giving them the gifts. Even after we left the classroom, kids were following us, physically grabbing onto us, and it just wasn't conducive to helping their learning in any sort of way. It wasn't supporting the school. It wasn't supporting their learning. It was supporting these horrible qualities that you wouldn't want in any child, especially one that's in an impoverished country, where that may make them see, hey, it's better for you to go and beg. You can get a lot more from doing that rather than from staying in school. So a bit of a tangent, but anyways, moving on to the tour guides. The guides themselves were really great. They were locals from the area, which was something different from G Adventure. One thing that I didn't like, however, is we had 3 guides throughout the 5 weeks. So when we moved from country to country, we got different guides. So it was a little tough. One guide would sort of get their bearing with the group. They would understand the group dynamic, and then they would leave. So one such example was we had a great tour guide for our first part of the trip, and there were a couple of times we had activities, and he could kind of gauge us and say, you guys look kind of tired. Do you really want to do this? It's low season, it's rainy, whatever the issue was, it might not be as grand as we'd expected. And that was really great. But then we had a second tour guide who didn't really do that, and we ended up including a lot of things that we didn't want to do. So like with any other company, it was sort of hit or miss, but overall I found them to be very knowledgeable. They were really great at being translators, at knowing the area. One thing that I sort of mentioned before is this idea of commission and kickback. So there were quite a few places with one of our tour guides where we went and it was exceedingly expensive for the area, and the food quality was not that good, or the activity that we went to wasn't that great. And it sort of became apparent to my group and I that this person was taking us to these places because they were getting some sort of commission or kickback. Now, again, that wasn't true with all the guides, that was just with one. One of the other guides, it did seem like a couple of places he was getting kickback, but they were good places. They were good value for the money, and because of that, it didn't bother me. I was happy to support a local business, happy to have my tour guide get that kickback, but as long as the quality was up to par. Another thing with the tour guides is that because it is a more budget tour, and maybe too because it was in Southeast Asia, there was no tipping of the guides. So I personally tip my guides, but I don't think anyone else in my group did. And this is another reason probably why they rely on these places that do have kickbacks. So again, if the culture and the environment of the tour company was a little bit different and encouraged that tipping, then maybe they wouldn't be so reliant on taking us to places that maybe weren't the best, but they were getting that commission on the back end. So that's my pretty exhaustive review of Stray Asia. I know I mentioned a little bit their structure into how they actually set up the tours. I think I'll do a whole nother video on that because it's very confusing and their website is not the best at being laid out. So I think I'll do a whole nother video on that sometime soon. And check out my IG Adventures video if you haven't already, where I talk a little bit about that. Those are my 2 guided travels that I've done, and I love doing guided travel. I hope to make more videos explaining about how guided travel works and information on which ones are best, because it's your money and you can't really see how it is until you've tried it. I hope this information helped you out, helped you choose a little bit about your tours for Asia. Have you ever done a tour in Asia? I would love to know other people's experiences in the comments below. Anyways, happy traveling, everyone.